In this video, I want to talk about making selections and some of the selection tools that we have available in Photoshop. So I'm going to start out with this blank white canvas. This might be easier to illustrate some of these tools initially. So in our toolbar on the very left-hand side, the top tools here are our selection tools. We have our Marquee tools. The shortcut is the letter M. And we have rectangular and elliptical marquee. Over here we have our lasso tools. The handy shortcut is the L key. And we have the regular, polygonal, and magnetic lassos. And then we have our quick selection and magic wand tools. And so let me show you what these marquee tools do. Sometimes it's easy just to kind of select an area. So the way this works is you're going to click and drag diagonally. So wherever you start, you're going to go to the opposite corner. And that's going to make a rectangular marquee tool. And so these little marching ants here, the rectangular marquee tool allows you to select an area to work in, but protecting everything else. So it's kind of like making a mask or some type of thing where if you're spray painting, you don't want to work everywhere because the paint will get everywhere. So you can find the area to work on, and in this case, you can do it with a elliptical marquee tool. So let me do something really quickly here. So don't worry about this. We'll come back to the brushes and colors here shortly. Paintbrush, and if I paint here, I can't see anything happening. But if I go up to the edge of this, I can see I'm only painting within that rectangular selected area. Everything else is protected. Let me undo that. So a rectangular marquee tool allows you to paint in a specific area or edit in a specific area. I can go ahead and make a rectangular marquee tool like this. I can go in and make a vertical one. I can make it as long and narrow as I want. At the very top, with any of the selection tools, you'll notice some options here. And each tool has its own options. Here we have our new selection tool. This is our add to current selection tool. Subtract from current selection, and intersect with the selection. But the feather tool we'll come back to. So for this one, I have a new one. If I click and drag and make a new selection, it's going to make a brand new one and get rid of the other one. Here, if I say add, I can actually add to that selection. They don't have to touch. So you notice a little plus sign on my cursor. The plus sign just means that you're going to add to that current selection. They can overlap, and that will just add to that piece here. The subtract just removes that area. So if I want to remove a piece, it subtracts it. If I want to make a little hole in something, I can do that as well. The intersect, what that will do is anything it intersects with the current selection. In other words, if I click and drag this box here, the only selection that will stay is currently inside this box. So anything outside the box to my upper right and to the top will go away. So only intersects with the current selections. And so you can see it just kept this area here. So the nice thing about the selection tools is you can mix and match. So if I go to the elliptical marquee tool, notice those selections are still available. So here, if I do a new one, it does exactly the way the other one did. It removes the other selection. Or if I undo that and I want to add to it, I can just add a little piece here, add something down here, or whatever. So you can see you can get some complicated and complex shapes or selections with the various tools. Here's my subtract from. So again, if I want to remove something, you can do that as well. Okay. Whenever you're working with a selection, you're only going to be painting or working or editing within that selected area. So again, anything here is selected and I'm only working in that area. Everything around there is protected. Now there will be situations where you want to do it in reverse. And so in other words, I want to edit out in this area, not inside here. I don't want to have to go in and make the selection again because it took me too long to make it in the first place. So what I want to do now is I want to reverse the selection. So in other words, the area that's selected will no longer be selected and the area that's not selected will become selected. Under the Select menu, you will say Inverse. It's basically reversing the selection. So I click Inverse. Notice these little marching ants, that's what they're called, these little dotted lines, they go to the edge. That means this background area is selected. So if I went in and picked a different color, something fancy like blue, in here, I'm not able to edit, but as soon as I move out here, I can edit around here. It's one of my best works of art, I must say. And so you can make a selection and use it inside the selected area, or inverse it and use it outside that selected area. So they are very powerful, you know, when you combine these different selection tools. So let me go ahead and reverse some of this stuff here and get rid of that. So whenever you're done with the selection, you definitely want to get rid of it so you're not using it, and you want to be able to edit elsewhere. We go under the Select menu again and say Deselect. Now a really handy shortcut to memorize is Command D on the Mac or Control D on the PC, and that's just deselect. Notice Inverse has Command Shift I or Control Shift I, so that's also handy to know, but you know, it's not critical. But deselect does come in very handy when you're editing. Deselect, your selection goes away, and now if I was to paint, I'm painting everywhere. Okay, so we have our Marquee tools. Let's go with the Lasso tools. The Lasso tools work very similarly. We have our selections here, and we have the options at the top here. And so we have our add to, subtract from, and intersect. So again, you know, with the Lasso tools, it allows you to create these really, you know, funky, free-form organic shapes. So painting inside there stays inside that little funky shape. And so going back to the Lasso tool, we can add to it, subtract, and so on. So that part works exactly the same. You can mix and match again. So here with the Polygonal Lasso tool, and I'm going to go ahead and deselect that. The Polygonal Lasso tool doesn't give you that free-form organic shape, but what it does is give you straight lines. So I click once, and I move my mouse somewhere else. So I click once, and then I move the mouse. I click again, and it will set these little points. And so all I'm doing is clicking. Not sure if you can hear my keyboard. So I'm clicking, and every time I click, I let go of the mouse, and this little line, this lasso, follows my mouse. So I'm not dragging the whole time. I'm just clicking from point to point. You need to get back to the starting point to complete that shape or that selection, and you notice the cursor turns to a little circle. From there, you just click it, and now you've got this, you know, odd looking shape. It's great if you're trying to line up the edge of a building, or, you know, the lines on the street or something like that. Anything that has a nice straight edge, this is a great tool to use. Again, deselect. And the Magnetic Lasso tool, that does need information on an image information to make its selection. So I'll go ahead and turn an image on. So Magnetic Lasso tool, I'll turn this layer off. So we're looking at our image here. And if we zoom in, you know, it works off of areas of contrast. So in other words, you know, if it was super subtle like this area in here, it wouldn't do a good job selecting. But what it will do is look at, you know, nice areas of contrast and be able to actually select those out. So it's got a little brush circle here, and it's hard to see it on this screen, but there's a little crosshair or a little plus sign inside of it. That just means you are going to follow along at that crosshair, and I'm just going to click once, and once I click, I'm just going to drag around the area that I want to select. Now I don't want to go too fast because I want it to drop these little points, and you should be able to see these little rectangular points, these little anchor points that it's dropping. So you notice it just kind of popped out there because the contrast is not as good. You can click if you get to a point and it looks pretty good, you can click to set one manually. But here I'm just going to let it work its magic. And going all the way back to the beginning. And there, you should be able to close that shape off. Sorry. Okay, so this one, and this is a good example, not all these selection tools are going to give you the most precise selection right off the bat. You might have to work it a little bit. Now, we could have used the elliptical marquee tool for something like this, but I kind of wanted to show how that magic wand, or I'm sorry, the magnetic lasso worked. So in this case, if we needed to clean this up, I'm zooming in, and again, the shortcut for zooming in is Command or Control Spacebar. Spacebar gives me the hand tool so I can pan around or move my image around within the window here. And so I didn't even have to change tools. Command plus or Command minus will zoom in and out, or Control plus and minus will zoom in or out. And again, you can use the navigator over here on the right hand side to zoom in or out and pan around your image here. So what I want to do next is I'm going to use another selection tool and subtract this area. So I want to get rid of this extra piece. So notice the minus sign on the cursor. And so what I'm going to do is click and drag. Now this is a lasso tool, so I'm going to click and drag around the best I can. And I'm using my trackpad for some reason, and I should use my mouse. So I'm not going to do the whole thing at once because sometimes it gets a little bit more difficult. There's my mouse. And I'm going to click and drag. That's too much coffee today. Look at that. That's a terrible line, but you get the idea. Okay, so over here, same thing. Oh man, my mouse is a little wonky today. I'm going to blame it on the mouse. Okay, so on this one, again, just kind of going down here. Now you could try the magnetic lasso tool again to subtract, but notice I was just going in and subtracting that area. I can go back in and add this in if I took too much off. Use the add to. Now there are shortcuts to allow you to add and subtract on the fly. Option or Alt key will give you the subtract from. You can see the cursor, it's very difficult. There it is. Minus, Shift key will add to. Alt or Option key will subtract from. So here I can subtract. Cool. All right, that's close enough. So anyway, this way I can actually just work in this area. So if I wanted to take my paintbrush and paint over this thing, I can do it this way. I don't want to do that because that's really bad. But that's the idea. So you can mix and match these different lasso tools or any of the selection tools and get a more precise selection. We'll get into more precise ways to select, but I just want to show you the basic selection tools. I'm going to go ahead and deselect that. And then the last tool I want to show you is the quick selection tool. Now that will probably do a better job here. And so the way it works is it just kind of looks at everything and kind of looks for edges, basically. So I'm going to deselect that because that did a really bad job. But again, it's got the new selection, add and subtract from. It works off of a kind of a brush idea. So this one is just jumping way out of there. So it's probably not the best choice. But what it's going to do is give you a quick, hence its name, quick selection. So let's say on the white shirt, notice how it just brushing along a little bit. Now if you brush along too much, it's going to take too much off. So you have to take it in little steps. Don't get too impatient. And don't forget to zoom in at times. But this is actually doing a pretty good job on the white shirt. Okay, a little bit much on there. Add a little bit to this here. And on this part, again, don't forget to zoom in if you have to. I'm going to subtract from this, and I'm going to make the brush a little bit smaller. We'll have another video on brushes here. So I'm just going to take the outside, work my way in a little bit, let it do its thing, and voila. So from there I could, I'll make a new layer, and I'm going to do a couple little tricky things. I'm going to edit, fill it with that color, the foreground color. Click OK, and there we go. She's got a beautiful blue shirt. Ta-da! So I'm going to show you guys how to do this in an upcoming video. So basically those are our selection tools. The last one, which we didn't cover, which does a pretty good job, is the Magic Wand tool, and it goes in and creates selections similar to the Quick Selection tool, but it basically looks at pixels based on a certain tolerance. So what does that mean? So in other words, we've got a light gray value here, and the tolerance is set to 12. And so if I click on this here, zoom in, click here, it's going to look for 12 values lighter and darker than that area. So when I click that, it's picking that gray and it's stopping over here because this falls out of that tolerance range. If I change that to 1, it's going to create a narrow swath right down here. If I change it to 60, I'm deselecting each time. If I change it to 60, now it's going to pick up even more, even stuff that's not white but falls within the tolerance range. So you need to find that happy medium. That's why Command D is handy, because if you try something and it doesn't work, then you can deselect it, or Command D or Control D on the PC. So here, depending on what you're selecting and how different the values are, I'm going to click this. I'm going to select Add to that selection, and I'm going to keep clicking on this until I get all the stuff that I want selected. Okay. Now, it may seem like it's a really super handy tool, and if it takes you for a long time, to make these selections, then what you can do is go in and change the tolerance, increase it or decrease it as necessary. So all I'm doing is basically selecting those areas. Now what I want to do is I want to show you a quick preview of what it's creating. So you can see it's not quite getting everything. See these little darker areas? The darker areas represent areas that are not selected. The white areas are areas that are selected. So along the edges, sometimes it gets a little rough, and it may not get you the precise selection that you're looking for. So my go-to typically is the Quick Selection tool, and then Magic Wand if I need it. And again, if it's something a little bit more geometric, one of the Marquee tools. And if I need to just do a quick and dirty little selection, I'll use the Lasso tools. And there are more sophisticated ways to make selections, but this is the basics, and this will get you started and going a long way. So that's it for now on this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Oh, wait a minute. I almost canceled that. We do have a couple things to point out. I'm going to show you this again. So really quickly, on any of these selection tools, you have a feather. So here, I'm going to set this circle to a 0 feather, and I'm going to fill it with some black paint. So that we have a 0 feather. Let me show you the difference here. I'm going to make another selection. I'm going to change the feather though to 3 on this case. Make it about the same size, and then I'm going to change it to 10. Again, and let's make it 50. Boom. Going all in here. All right, so 0 feather, and let me zoom in so you can see the difference. This one has 0 feather, so it's got a nice defined edge. This is a 3 pixel feather, so it's a little bit softer transition. This is our 10, so even more soft on the edges, and 50, so it's like a little fuzzy ball there. And so sometimes you want that selection have a soft edge depending on what you're selecting. If it's a super defined crisp shape, you want a 0 feather. If it's something in between or something a little on the blurry side, then you want to change your feather to something appropriate. And so again, each of our selection tools will have that feather option. And so, well, except these selection tools, our lasso tools and our marquee tools will all have the feather on the selection. Okay, and that should do it. So enjoy.